Your exam will be at this point. 60 questions.
Look at 80.
What's up?
The higher the better.
70.
Yeah.
Something like 68.
If you miss just one, you miss how many points? 6.
68 or 69.
Yeah, but there's more to miss. Man.
You'll have 10
There's more to
matching,
miss.
10 true false, and the rest will be for a total of 204. I don't like rounds. I like nice 40. I'd rather give you bonus points than round up.
And we would much rather have that.
Glad everybody can make it today.
Can we get on this much we can?
That's my glasses somewhere. Bro, do you have all the notes on his notes?
Do I have them?
The notice notes from the beginning start again. What are you going to do?
I got one class and I'm free.
If you can go through your 3
What are you
exams and you can answer
11.
not only the questions on your exam,
Okay, I'm going to look in the
with
question to print out
100%
the stuff.
accuracy, tell me why every of the other answers are false, then you would probably do pretty well. I would
No.
think so. I would think so. I would be able to open up any exam question and point to any question and say that's the answer, not just because I know that's the answer, because I happen to remember a single fact that led me to believe that's the answer, but I can also tell you exactly with accuracy why A, B, C, and D are false. You know it that well. Then I would expect you to do wrong. What are they?
You from New York? Like, what the hell? Still, it's in your blood.
I have exams up here. Now it's yes. I have your exams up here. If you forgot to pick up your exam last week, I also brought exam 1 and exam 2. So come get them. That one's me. If you forgot to pick up any of your exams, they're up here. So, okay. You never got it. So I know you guys aren't going to care at all, but these are not good. I did buy new pens coming today. So next semester I'll be able to erase my mistakes as opposed to stretching out my mistakes.
Okay.
I'm excited. I was so excited. I went and told 2 other professors about them. They were excited. They had never heard of these pens either.
Wait, what? I've missed that.
You guys have changed the way we do notes here at UTA. No, I was excited. I got new pens. These aren't the new pens. They're coming in today.
Right.
Dude, it's over. Strike.
Yay! Thank you. Are these the clicker ones?
Clicker ones are refillable.
Are these, that's the ones I got. Are these the clicker ones? These are the ones I got. Right. There are a lot of options. You've never looked at these pens. You go on Amazon, there are like 40 different options of different kinds of pens to buy. I think these are the ones I got. So I'm excited. Thankful.
Yeah, the Japanese imports are really
The Japanese imports.
yeah.
How are they different?
The packaging is in Japanese and they have about 4 different colors you can't get.
I never knew there were so many options. Okay, let's finish real quick, and then we'll have some time to talk at the end of class about your exam and about the class in general. Again, I'll say we got about halfway through, probably maybe a little further than halfway through electron transport chain. Electron transport and oxidative phosphorylation. The oxidative part we kind of went over so far. So the oxidative part we went over. The oxidative part refers to the oxidation of NADH, FADH2 in complex 1 and complex 2. We went over the oxidation part. The phosphorylation part is what we're going to get to today. And what is oxidative phosphorylation? It's the coupling of the oxidation of NADH to the oxidation of FADH2 with the phosphorylation of ADP to ATP. Right? We have phosphorylation. We've already talked about phosphorylation of ATP if something else to produce. ADP is very energetically favorable, right? And what's the delta G naught of this reaction? About 30 what? Kilojoules per mole, right? So it's about 30 kilojoules per mole. So you can imagine the opposite direction. It's about positive 30 kilojoules per mole, right? So if it's negative 30 kilojoules per mole in the hydrolysis direction, the opposite direction is going to be about positive 30 kilojoules per mole. Not very favorable at all. It's not going to happen. How do we overcome these large thermodynamic barriers? Coupling and removal of products. So in this case, we're coupling. We're coupling a reaction that's very unfavorable. It's necessary to another reaction, the oxidation of NADH, the oxidation. That's kind of a twice removed coupling. And you'll see that as we go through. We're not directly coupling the oxidation of NADH to the phosphorylation of ATP, right? ADP. But you'll kind of see where we're getting. Right, so our first step we've already talked about. Yeah, we did. We talked about complex 1. So complex 1 oxidizes NADH, reduces ubiquinone. It oxidizes NADH, reduces ubiquinone, and it shuttles hydrogen. So this is not directly coupled to formation of ATP, right? This is right. Not. It's coupled directly to the movement of hydrogen ions and the reduction of ubiquinone to ubiquinol. What's the difference in NADH and FADH? One has to transport 2 electrons. Another one can transport 1 or 2 electrons, right? Flavins, FAD, FMN are not strict 2 electron transfers. 1 electron transfers, 2 electron transfers. So things like FAD, things like ubiquinol, and UQ can also exist in a partially reduced state, in a UQH. We call that semiquinone. UQ exists in its fully reduced state, UQH2, we call that ubiquinol. So ubiquinone with an H, semiquinone, ubiquinone with H2 would be fully reduced ubiquinol. Same thing with FAD. Can exist in a state FADH, a semiquinone state, where it's only partly reduced. It can also exist in its fully reduced state, FADH2. Why do we need to use things like, why can we not transfer NADH directly to ubiquinone? Any idea? This protein, so if we go up here, all of this is happening at 1, right? In complex 1. We zoom in back on complex 1. So complex 1. Complex 1 is massive protein that kind of looks like that. So here's complex 1. NADH has a binding site outside of our enzyme here. NADH at this point is reduced to NAD, and these 2 electrons go to an enzyme bound FAD, right? and reduce these 2 electrons, go to the enzyme down FAD, it gets us to FADH. Q has a binding site here. So ubiquinone, called UQ, right? How do we get those electrons there? Is that a large distance? That is a large distance. We've talked about interactions at active sites. But we really haven't talked about distances. If you're able to look at 3-dimensional complexes and look at active sites, and if you had software to measure these distances among things at the active site are usually in terms of 1 to 6 angstroms. Things that are relative to chemistry are that close to the substrate, 1 to 6 angstroms away from the substrate. The distance from the binding site of NADH all the way to ubiquinone is over 40 angstroms away. That is a mile. That is miles for chemistry to happen. That is, chemistry does not happen within 40 angstroms. So how do we get electrons from one binding site shuttled all the way to the other binding sites? The answer is we have to have some sort of facilitated movement of electrons all the way across. This is seen in these enzymes in the form of iron-sulfur clusters. Chains of iron-sulfur clusters basically take electrons here all the way to ubiquinone, and they can only take how many electrons at a time? 1 electron at a time, right? So we can't transfer 2 electrons from NADH directly to iron-sulfur clusters. That's why we need flavins. So 2 electrons are taken from NADH to FADH, right? And FADH can transfer 1 or 2 electrons at a time. We can transfer 1 electron at a time to an iron-sulfur cluster. Once that electron shuttles on to ubiquinone, it can transfer another electron. It can be reduced again by another NADH. It can transfer electrons 1 at a time. Iron-sulfur clusters, the iron-sulfur clusters are what shuttle these electrons all the way across to ubiquinone. And we're able to reduce ubiquinone to some quinone and even further to ubiquinol. So why do we have all of this? Why not NADH directly to ubiquinone? Because we have to move those electrons a long way. Electrons have to move a long way. So to do that, we utilize iron-sulfur clusters, and iron-sulfur clusters can only transfer 1 electron at a time. We went to complex 2. Oh, sure, wait. Ended with complex 2. We said complex 2 we didn't even really need to spend much time about because we've already talked about it, right? This is a membrane-bound step in the TCA cycle, conversion of succinate to fumarate. So what are we doing at this step? We're oxidizing succinate to create fumarate, and basically this is where we stopped for our TCA cycle, right? We talked about this. We talked about these electrons are given to FADH2, and then it goes on to electron transportation. Stop it. So what's happening here? These electrons, again, given to a flavin. Flavins have the option of transferring 1 or 2 electrons. You usually see these when they're paired with things like iron-sulfur clusters, because iron-sulfur clusters can only hold 1 electron at a time, right? So we're able to eventually reduce many iron-sulfur clusters, and again, it takes the electrons all the way to ubiquinone to produce ubiquinol. And if we go back to this little drawing, it's kind of easy to see here in this figure. Where does ubiquinone? Oh, so this is our matrix side, our inside, right? So this is, we didn't define N and P side, did we? Inside. Why? So I always call this matrix side or intermembrane side. Your textbook usually doesn't call it matrix side or intermembrane side, maybe because they didn't feel like typing it over and over and over again. They usually call it Q or P side and inside. You know why? No, that'd be funny. I like that. Inside. No. A negative side and a positive side. What happens when you pump positive protons outside? It's going to be slightly positive, right? It's talking about the relative charge on each side of the membrane. Imagine if we're pumping positive charges out of the membrane, we're going to be left with a slightly negative charge on the inside of the membrane. We're going to be left with a slightly positive charge on the outside. They usually talk about it in terms of P side and inside, positive and negative sides. NADH largely resides inside the mitochondria, right? Why? What we've talked about so far, what generates most of our NADH? TCA, Krebs cycle, right? Where's this happening? In the matrix. In the matrix, right? in the matrix. So most of our NADH is in the matrix, right? What about ubiquinol? Where does ubiquinol reside? Ubiquinol. Ubiquinol are, for the most part, bound inside the inner membrane. So inside this lipid bilayer membrane. It's a very non-polar compound, non-polar spaces. And you don't have any spaces more non-polar than the inside of the lipid bilayer membrane, right? So when we talk about ubiquinol and ubiquinone, it's hopefully it makes more sense to realize that these things are membrane bound inside the lipid bilayer membrane. So when we're talking about ubiquinol and ubiquinone being transferred from one complex to another, you can freely move inside this membrane. So you can imagine inside this membrane, there is literally a sea of ubiquinone, semiquinone, and ubiquinol. The fully reduced state. So there is some degree of all three of these floating around in here. Some degree of all three of these floating around in here.
If you change colors,
Can y'all see it?
not really.
Absolutely. Help
Shut up, I'm blind.
It's hard to see. Is that better?
Yes.
There's some measure of ubiquinol or ubiquinone in every single form in this membrane. So it doesn't really need to be transferred from one complex to another. It can freely diffuse through the membrane with however it wants. So the abundance of any of these at any active site, so the abundance of UQ at this active site or UQH2 at this active site is really only a function, it's a function of fusion, which is really fast, right? So it's really only a function of concentration, how much is available in this membrane. Okay, so we're there. We've done 1 and 2. We did a little summary right at the end of class relating what is the fate of NADH versus what is the fate of succinate and therefore FADH, where it enters the electron transport chain. They enter the electron transport chain at 2 different places. And complex 1 and complex 2 are mutually exclusive. One pathway is not dependent upon the other pathway. You'll notice complex 3, and we'll go on to complex 4. Complex 3 and complex 4 are not mutually exclusive of complex 1 or 2. Complex 1 or 2 both produce ubiquinol, which further is a factor of complex 3, which produces something else that's a factor of complex 4. So it's I want you to know that complex 1 and complex 2 are mutually exclusive of each other. However, they do have a common product. You should be able to give me a guess of NADH to FADH. If I told you that these do not produce, on average, the same number of ATPs per NADH, the same number of ATPs per FADH2 or per succinate, which one would you expect to produce more? Why NADH?
It starts with a higher. It always
That's
delivers
what
2.
It always what?
Delivers 2 electrons.
All of these are true statements. They're all
Complex
true
1
statements.
actually comes protons.
Ah,
complex
there
2
you
doesn't.
go. There you go. So they're all true statements. There's one major thing is that there are 2 factors involved in the formation of ATP. 2 factors involved in the formation of ATP. One of those factors is the production of ubiquinol, right? I mean, both of these produce 1 ubiquinol per NADH, or 1 ubiquinol or 2 ubiquinol, 1 ubiquinol per each of these, right? But another factor involved in ATP production is the movement or the creation of this positive side versus negative side. Difference in pH, difference in charge on the opposite side of this membrane. One of these does contribute, and one of these does not contribute. So in most organisms, a good average for most organisms, NADH usually leads to somewhere along the lines of 3 ATP, where FADH really only leads to somewhere around 2 ATP. Main factors is because one of them is involved in the movement of hydrogens across the membrane. Complex 3, ubiquinone,
cytochrome C oxidase, oxidoreductase. And again, you may not see these names in your textbook. You do not see these names in your textbook. As the enzymes that catalyze these reactions, these are the enzymes I like to use. Why? Because they tell you exactly what is happening. They tell you exactly what this is working on. You're reducing ubiquinone and actually reducing ubiquinol. Oxidizing. We are oxidizing ubiquinol, right? We just produced ubiquinol from both complex 1 and complex 2. So this is being oxidized. We're using those electrons to reduce cytochrome C. And this is also involved in showing protons across the membrane. There's a nice figure in your textbook. You're going to draw it, but we really don't have a lot of time to get through this. Net reaction here is one ubiquinone and 2 protons from the negative side. 2 oxidized cytochrome C. An oxidized form of ubiquinone. 4 protons on the positive side and 2 cytochrome C reduced. Cytochrome C exists in the intermembrane space. So if you kind of go back and look at the last figure, cytochrome C, where ubiquinone is bound in the membrane in this intermembrane, cytochrome C is not. It's actually being reduced on the intermembrane space side, transferred from complex 3 to complex 4. What's actually happening in this reaction? This is the net reaction. This is not what's happening in this reaction. This reaction utilizes 2 different ubiquinols. 2 different ubiquinols. So it brings in a ubiquinol, it reduces it, it brings in another ubiquinol, reduces it, and then it gives back a ubiquinol. So it's kind of weird. The reaction takes place in 2 different phases. You have some nice figures in your textbook. We were going to draw one. It would take us about 20 minutes to draw both of these cycles. We just don't have that much time. But it's a little more complex than just net reaction shows. You need to know for your exam. It is something you should probably look at. Step 4, catalyzed by cytochrome oxidase. Cytochrome oxidase oxidizes. What do you think it oxidizes? How did you know? Oxidizes cytochrome C, couples this with the reduction of molecular oxygen from water and shuttling protons across membrane. And we're going to talk about the net reaction. What actually happens here. Two cytochrome C's. Reduced state. 4 protons. 1 molecular oxygen. 2 cytochrome C's. Oxide. false. The other two protons are incorporating this water. Even put is released on the negative side back into the matrix. But they are not released in the matrix as protons. As proton ions, they're released as hydrogens as a part of water. It's not in number of oxygens. It's negative side, positive side. So most of these complexes are membrane bound. However, we have talked about two electron carriers that we call mobile electron carriers. So two electron carriers are actually mobile. What two electron carriers are those? What do you think happens to ubiquinol after we oxidize ubiquinol back to UQ? So we oxidize ubiquinol back to UQ. What do you think happens to it? Travels right back to. I can erase this. Don't worry. It travels right back to complex 2 or right back to complex 1 where it's going to be utilized again. Right? It's not bound. It can move. Right? So ubiquinol or coenzyme Q is a mobile electron carrier. What's up?
Why is it 4 on the left side and
4? Yeah. Why?
the negative? On your diagram it says 2.
On my diagram. It's showing, so here's what it should say. It should say 2 protons here. It's actually left off 2 more protons here. So these, it's showing here that these 2 protons are used and incorporated into water, right? It also shows 2 protons being moved across. It doesn't show the movement of these protons across anywhere. So this should say 4H plus, right? 4 protons are moved across this. Does that make sense? So I guess it shouldn't say 2 protons. So it's basically saying these 2 protons have been moved across. Does that make sense? Keep forgetting, I don't have to scratch out anything. No light. So coenzyme Q, a mobile electron carrier, another mobile electron carrier, cytochrome C, right? This oxidized cytochrome C is going to go right back to cytochrome C is going to go right back to complex 3 to be reduced again. So we have 2 mobile electron carriers, coenzyme Q, cytochrome C. There's a difference in location. You should know where both of these reside. Cytochrome C, where will you find cytochrome C? Intermembrane space. Coenzyme Q, in the inner membrane, right? Not in the inner membrane space. It's actually inside the inner membrane. It's not bound in the inner membrane in the sense that it's bound in the membrane where it can't move. It's found in the space, right? In the hydrophobic space between liquefied and membrane. So it can move along inside that membrane. Find where it's liquefied. And this is not the correct word. It should say proton. So 2 key ideas. One, most of these electron carriers, these complexes, are bound in the membrane. They cannot move. However, some of these are mobile, and that's necessary. That's how one complex communicates with another complex, how it proceeds, or through the movement of things like ubiquinol, the movement of cytochrome C. And the second main idea is that proton flow causes 2 things. We've already talked about one. We have a difference in the number of hydrogens. There's a difference in hydrogen ion concentration. That's also known as a difference in pH, right? So we're going to have a pH difference, a pH gradient, the inside versus the outside. And we just talked about a second ago, your textbook will refer to this as a positive and negative side. We'll also have a charge gradient, right? And the charge gradient, this can be written a few different ways. One of the ways your textbook writes it is a difference in potential electric energy. So this written as delta psi. You will also see this written as V. It can also be represented as a voltage, right? So regardless of which one you see, it's what they're referring to, potential energy. And this is creating a gradient across what membrane? Inner membrane. Creates a gradient, pH gradient, electric gradient across the inner membrane. And we are going to go through the mitochondrial ATPs synthase enzyme in about 10 minutes. And I apologize again. Hopefully what this will do is this, what we talked about yesterday, or Monday. What we talked about Monday and what we talked today will give you a nice idea of, I understand how this works on a general scale. That's the idea. And that wasn't the idea at the beginning when I started this semester. The idea was we're going to break down ATP synthase. We're going to spend 3 days on it. Instead of spending 3 days on it, we're going to spend 20 minutes on it. I apologize. We've just run out of time. But hopefully we'll have enough of a foundation here so when you go back and read again over ATP synthase, you can glean a little bit more information from it. You understand the basics. You understand the overall idea. It's a weird enzyme. You can't compare it with anything else. It doesn't do anything like anything else does. It's weird. That's why we spend a lot of time on it. Unfortunately, we can't. But hopefully I'll give you a foundation of I know enough that I can read more and understand a little bit. At the end of class, I will tell you the type of questions I'll ask you about this chapter. I'm not going to ask you any questions. I'm not going to ask you detailed questions. I want these but I would encourage you, if you take Biochem 2, spend a little bit more time on this, especially right before you take Biochem 2. You may want to go back and look over, since we weren't able to talk about it in much detail, go back and look over electron transport chains, specifically look over ATP synthase. Okay, this enzyme consists of 2 subunits. Many subunits, two main complexes. F0 complex and F1 complex. Pretty much A, B, and C constitute the F0 complex, and all the Greek letters make up the F1 complex. We're not going to talk about all these. We'll talk about your book will break down roles of each of these complexes. We'll break down the roles of a few very important ones, and talk about, in general, what is this enzyme doing, and why is it different from any other enzyme. So what is that? So we've created a positive side. We have a negative side, right? So this side is proton rich. This is proton deficient. There are 2 F's. Okay, so proton flow through A. So proton flow through A and through C back through A. To the other side of the membrane. What does this do? So protons flow through A, through C, massive subunit C, back to the other side of the membrane. What does this do? This actually creates large conformational changes, large changes. And basically, what is it doing? It's sitting here rotating on this part of your enzyme. This is weird. Very, very weird. This is an enzyme complex. The best way to describe this enzyme complex would be, this is the only enzyme complex I know that its main goal is to harness mechanical energy to power reactions. It's very, very weird. We haven't talked about anything like that so far. But what is it doing? It's using this proton gradient, kind of like a turbine. Anything about how electricity is made. Kind of like a turbine spinning, it spins. So I guess the movement of C translates this generates rotation at C, right? So it generates rotation at C, drives rotation at gamma, precipitation. Yes, at both alpha and beta. So movement of protons across generates movement, and this movement is translated from enzyme subunit to enzyme subunit to enzyme subunit. Why do we care? We care because this is a very weird enzyme complex that harnesses mechanical energy power the necessary conformational changes at alpha and beta. To facilitate the reaction, ADP plus inorganic phosphate. And normally this reaction has a delta G naught of about positive 30 kilojoules. Right? Normally this reaction has a delta G naught of about positive 30 kilojoules per mole. So when you look through your textbook, it's going to spend a lot of time, it's not going to spend a lot of time talking about these first two steps. It kind of glosses over that and talks about exactly how to A and B, subunits A, subunits B, exactly what goes on at subunits A and subunits B to help facilitate this reaction. Hopefully, when you read through your textbook, this isn't very hard to follow. It's kind of hard to follow. How do we ever get here? How do we get to A and how do we get to B? How is A and B moving through these various conformational changes? So these can exist as three different conformations. But how do we get to these conformational changes and how do we get through them? That's where 1 and 2 come along. 1 and 2, the purpose of these enzyme subunits is to power the conformational changes that are occurring at site. At the alpha sites and at the beta sites to facilitate this. The last thing I want to say, there are 3 phrases that I kind of want to define because depending on what textbook you use, they'll use different phrases. They kind of use them interchangeably. Or if you take this class with another professor, if you talk to someone in the field about any of these things, they frequently interchange these quite a bit. I just want to give you a kind of my overall idea, a general idea of what people are talking about when they refer to these things, or what your textbook is really talking about when they refer to these things. So oxidative phosphorylation, hopefully it makes sense. We've talked about this before. Simply, we are coupling 2 things, right? The oxidation of a source to the production of ATP, right? So we are coupling oxidation of NADH, or succinate and FADH. It's coupled to phosphoryl transfer. Onto ADP. Make ATP. That's a general. Can you see that? So what are we talking about when we're talking about oxidative phosphorylation? If you look in your textbook, if you Google it, you're going to see mouthfuls, huge answers. You'll see like 6 sentences describing what oxidative. And then if you look at 6 different sources, you're going to find 6 different definitions of exactly what is oxidative phosphorylation. And yes, it is probably more complex than this. What is it tied to? You can go into all of these things, but what is it really? It's the coupling of the oxidation of electrons to the production of ATP. In general, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about oxidative phosphorylation. You'll see two other phrases that are really used interchangeably: chemiosmosis and proton motive force. What are you may see chemiosmosis, you may see it referred to as the chemiosmotic theory. It is the idea that we're creating this, what we just said, this gradient, this proton gradient. It's the idea idea that the electron transport chain creates a gradient so that is a pH gradient, right? And a voltage gradient or potential energy gradient. So chemiosmotic theory is the idea that the electron transport chain creates a gradient across the inner cytoplasmic membrane. Uses that to power the production of ATP, right? Chemiosmotic theory is basically when you create this gradient across the inner mitochondrial membrane, and that's what's used to power the production of ATP. When people use the term proton motive force, they are usually talking about the steps required or what is necessary in harnessing this gradient, harnessing this electrochemical gradient. When people use the term proton motive force, they're usually talking about my professor referred to proton motive force. When we talk about proton motive force, we're talking about batteries. It is a way to store energy and how we use that energy. How do we use that battery? Yes, I do realize that there's massive overlap between these two, and you can see why a lot of people use these interchangeably. They're really not. They're really referring to two different things. One is a theory of how this works, and the other one is the idea of how do we apply this? How is it used? I do get it. In many textbooks, you'll see both of these used interchangeably. Most people will use these interchangeably. But probably not. But again, I don't care. I want you to be aware. And when you're reading, I want you to be aware. The last thing I want to do is break down exactly what we've talked about in this chapter. Break down step by step. What is the fate of NADH? What is the fate of FADH? What is the fate of NADH? What happens to NADH? What's the fate of NADH? Oxidized to form what? NAD plus, sure. That has nothing. That goes back and is utilized again, right? As far as forward in the electron transport chain, ubiquinol. So it oxidizes NADH, uses those electrons to reduce ubiquinone to ubiquinol, right? So oxidation of NADH leads to the production of ubiquinol, UQH2, and what else? So it uses F and N, right? And sulfur clusters to get here, right? But it doesn't just produce ubiquinol. What else does it do? Yeah, that's very important, right? That's a very important step. Just as important as this step. It also pumps hydrogen, right? So oxidation of NADH produces something necessary for complex 3, right? Ubiquinol necessary for complex 3, and it pumps hydrogen. Oxidation of FADH. What does it do? It also creates ubiquinol. And it doesn't pump hydrogen, right? It doesn't pump hydrogen. Two different things. One is involved with the movement of hydrogen. One is not involved with the movement of hydrogen. Both product 1 and 2 are functions of ATP production. NADH is slightly better than ATP. Complex 3. So this is what's happening in complex 1, right? This is what's happening in complex 2. What happens at complex 3? oxidize our products from 1 and 2. Right? It's coupled to the reduction of cytochrome C, and also the movement of more protons. What happens at 4? Cytochrome C is oxidized. Water is formed from what? O2 is reduced. That's kind of together, right? There's a couple. O2 is reduced to form water. What else? Proton. Told you if you have Lehman, especially an older copy of Lehman, I think even newer copies of Lehman, at some point refer to ATP synthase as complex 5 on your exam. I won't. I'll just call it ATP synthase. Complex 5 and ATP synthase. This point. Proton gradient is used, converted to mechanical energy, moving ATP synthase. This power is harnessed and used to create the necessary conformational changes to assist the reaction of ADP and organic phosphate. That is an overview of what we talked about. And if you know this, it will probably be good for your test. Questions I ask you will probably be over this rough explanation. I'll also probably ask you about specific electron transfers. So you should probably be aware of what NAD does, what FAD does, what high sulfur clusters do, what ubiquinol does. Specific questions about reaction mechanisms or mechanisms of action. A lot of these aren't known. A lot of these complexes we don't know. But specific questions about those are probably asked if you know these work, if you know these work well, and if you know the differences between things like FAD, flavins, NAD, and ubiquinol. What do they do? Some of them are strict 1 electron transfers, strict 2 electron transfers. Some of them can exist in a single quinone state, and they can transfer 1 or 2 electrons at a time. If you know those things, you should be good for this. You'll probably see 3, maybe 4 questions. Probably 3 questions. Other than that, any questions on this before you talk? We are finished. Pat yourself on the back. Before I let you ask questions about the exam, if you want to ask questions about the exam, what time is it? 47? Mm-hmm. Crap. Sorry. I intended to end sooner than that. 47. Any comments about the class? Anything you'd like? What have you learned? Not just about the class. What have you learned? You should, at the end of the class, you take a class for a whole semester. You should know something now that you didn't know then. Not necessarily about the class. What about anything about yourself that you know now that you didn't know then? You're tired. Tired. Anything else? If we had more time, I'd probably force answers out of you, but we don't. I hope you enjoyed the class. I did enjoy it. It was very fun. If you would please go to MyMav or whatever Whiteboard, I sent you a link to fill out a survey. I don't get the results of those surveys until after grades are posted, so I can't look at your survey and be like, I know who that was. I give it to giving her an A because she gave me good. No, I won't know who sent it anyway. But two, yeah, send those. It's helpful. We can change things. So if I don't like this about a class, if I say, man, this doesn't really work very well, and I go to the other biochemistry course, and I say, this doesn't work very well, they'll say, okay, well, that's what we like to do, so do it. But if I go there and I say, 45 students said this doesn't work very well, then they say, okay, because now that's what they listen to. And if they say no, then I can take it to someone else and I'll say, hey, look what 40 students said. They all agree that they don't like this in biochem. Will you give me permission to override that and change something? They can do that. So please go there, fill out a survey, tell me what I did good at, tell me what I sucked at. Tell me what I need to improve on. Tell me what you did like about the class. Tell me what you did not like about the class. Any of those things, they're all great things. And constructive criticism, destructive criticism, I have thick skin. Please tell me what you like. Tell me what you didn't like about me, about the class in general, about whatever. It's very helpful. It makes me better at my job. So please take the time and do that if you can. Anyway, other questions about your exam? I've told you, 40 questions. I think 40 multiple choice. No, 50 multiple choice. 10 short answer. 10. 50 multiple choice. 49 multiple choice. It is going to be 49 multiple choice. 10 true false. 10 matching questions. So a total of 69 questions, 3 points apiece. I believe that is 100 or 204 points. So you'll have 204 total points available on your exam. I told you I don't like decimals. 10 short answer, 45 essay.
What about essay?
49 multiple choice, 10 true false, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. What's that?
So are you giving those for since it's out of founder form?
Am I giving those as bonus?
Yeah. Are you going to grade it out of 104 or 200?
Am I going to grade what? Your final average out of 200?
Oh, so it's 4.
No, your final average will be calculated out of 500 points, right? There are just 204 available to give. So yes, those will be bonus points. So if you get a 201, you get 1 bonus point. 204, you get 4 bonus points. So you can miss 2 questions and still get 198 points.
Is that our grade with the quiz bonus points or
Is what your grade?
is that without? Okay.
500 is without the bonus points. So you'll notice that there are a total, so after we do this, there will be a total of 535 bonuses, or 535 points. That's how many total. So you've had 504 points worth of exams, right? So your first exam was 100, second exam was 100, third exam was 100, fourth exam, your final exam is going to be 204. So that's 504 points total. Then you had 31 bonus points. So that's 535 total points. I'm going to count that 535, and I'm going to divide it by 500, and that's your grade. So they are bonus points. Those 30 points are bonus points. I'm just going to divide everything by 500 instead of dividing it by 534. So basically 34 points for bonus points.
Is it matching from the pathways?
Most likely matching will probably come from pathways. What? You look like something stinks back there. You didn't like that angle.
The enzymes, or I mean, that could be anything.
Sure, it probably have a lot to do with enzymes, maybe regulation steps. What do the enzymes catalyze? What steps are regulation steps? Sure, it could be all of those things. If you know the steps of glycolysis, if you know the regulation steps, if you know how they're regulated at each step, and you know what enzyme catalyzes what reaction, you should be pretty good. No question? Any other questions? Oh, for your final, last thing I was going to say. For your final, you'll come in, you're going to drop your bags at the back of the room. I haven't really had this issue in y'all's class. We did in the other class, maybe because there were so many more people. You're going to drop your bags in the back of the room, not up here. We're going to have a TA in the back of the room. If your phone goes off, we're going to move your bag outside. If your phone vibrates, we're going to move it outside. It's super annoying. Super annoying and super distracting hearing phones vibrating all the time, especially if you're sitting in the front, if you're sitting in the back, and there are phones just going while you're trying to sit here and do a math problem. It's very, very annoying. So this is your only warning. If your phone vibrates, we're going to take your bag and we're going to sit outside. I'm sure you don't want your bag sitting outside. Turn your phone off. Don't turn it on vibrate. Leave your phone in the car. My initial thought was no bags. Do not let bags in class. That sucks. That's a long walk. I've walked it before. I know. I walked it for 5 years and I hated it. The worst thing about UTA. Every time, so I'm the graduate coordinator now, and I'm not for long. For another week and I'm done. And I just get to finish. Anyway, we have new graduate students coming in. They're like, "How is it here?" Now, I'm honest. The worst thing about UTA is the 45 minutes you have to get here early so that you can make it to class on time. You have to walk 5 miles uphill both ways to your car. It's not fun. So my initial thought was no bags, but then you'd have to go get, if you have other stuff to do, you'd have to go get your bag and come back. That sucks. This is your fair warning. Turn your phone off. Turn it on silent. No vibrating. Nothing. If we hear your phone vibrating and the TA is like, "Oh, that's the bag that's vibrating," he's going to take it and sit outside. So do not have the phone vibrating. Super annoying. Any other questions?
8 a.m., right?
8 a.m. Can you cheat? No. I'm glad you asked, though. That is a fair question. You cannot cheat. 8 a.m. 8 a.m. sharp. You have 2.5 hours.
Same room.
Same room. 8 a.m. You have 2.5 hours. You cannot cheat. You need your calculator. Calculator, pen, eraser. I'll have extra calculators, extra pens, extra erasers. No graphic calculators. But I will provide a